Now, across Texas, the issue is.
I'm Rudy Koski in Austin.
I'm Greg Krugen in Houston.
And I'm Stephen Dial in Dallas. And this is Texas. The issue is the issue this week: online sports betting.
Now, there have been several attempts over the past 10 years to expand gambling in Texas. When state lawmakers return to Austin in January, they'll be asked again. But this time, the legislative play will be limited to online sports betting. And the main pitchman is a familiar face: former Governor Rick Perry. I spoke to him about the proposal and why he has decided to become a key player.
I'm pretty sure people have been betting since the first time two guys met horseback in a dusty street, and probably centuries before that. So betting on sporting events is nothing new. 35, 36 other states already do this because the Supreme Court met and said, you can't ban this. This is a state issue. So 2/3 of the states have already said, you know what, this is going to go on. Let's regulate it. Let's make sure that it's safe. Let's make sure that your information doesn't get used by some nefarious platform somewhere. That's why the time is right.
So what type of gambling is this, and what type of gambling is this not?
Well, let me tell you what it's not first. It's not casino gambling. It's not a place that you would go and storefront types of thing. This is all online, what we call mobile sports betting. A cell phone or a laptop that they would have access to all of these platforms. Texans need to know that when they place a bet, and Rudy, they're going to place bets. I think if your opposition here is, I'm not for expansion of gambling, this is not an expansion of gambling.
Let's build on that. So when you were in office and running for office, you courted the conservative evangelical group that's technically against gambling. So what do you say to them? And I heard what you just said, that people are already doing it, but they're still saying, gosh, this just doesn't feel right. And what's Rick Perry being with these people?
If your issue is betting is just wrong, it's morally wrong, then that is absolutely, you're right. I'm not for expansion of gambling. Somebody said, well, what about casino gambling? And I said, listen, this Sports Betting Alliance is agnostic about that. They don't have a position. They're focused on the issue of mobile sports betting, period. That's the biggest education process, Rudy, that needs to go on. This is about a activity that has gone on for decades, if not centuries. And now, because of the proliferation of these devices, our iPhones, et cetera, it's relatively easy for someone to place a bet. Let's make sure that it's regulated and that it's safe.
I hear you saying that your motivation is regulation, making it safe, but I've also heard that you're being well compensated. You want to tell me how much you're being paid?
I hope I am being well compensated. The point is, that's a side issue from my perspective. I hope after I got out of public office, I have the right to negotiate a fair deal, and I will suggest to you, I got a fair deal.
You mentioned earlier that this alliance, some big names involved: Jerry Jones, Mark Cuban. Will you join them at the state capitol talking to lawmakers about this plan? Do you expect to be down here in Austin pushing this?
Well, I'm not a lobbyist. I'm the spokesperson. I'm their talent, so to speak. I'll be doing some educational processes with the people of the state of Texas. Right now, it's about the citizens of the state of Texas understanding this, so when they do have their conversations with their elected officials, they can express their desires. Rudy, one of the interesting things about this, and another one of the reasons that I signed on, I got comfortable the way that this was being put together, was they're doing it with a constitutional amendment. I think it's totally the right way to do it. Go to the people. And what we're asking the legislators to do is, listen, vote to allow your constituents the vote on this issue in the fall on a constitutional amendment. question.
The gatekeeper to this kind of resolution is most likely going to be Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick. Have you spoken to him about this? Have you heard any feedback from him on this?
I think he'll be fair. I think he will look to his members, but I also think he really respects the concept of the voters having the say here.
Y'all are estimating a lot of money could come into the state. Should that money be earmarked to something? Would you like to see that earmarked to something?
I'm not a big believer that you earmark with legislation. Put the money in the general revenue fund. Have your appropriations in your Senate Finance Committee meetings. That makes a lot more sense to me.
All right, guys, the former governor made his pitch in a word, and I say it with a hyphen, high roller. Greg, what's your word?
My word is vice.
Stephen, what is your word?
Transformational.
All right, talking about a transition, the Texas Trio has more to say. That's a sure bet. We'll be back in a moment with our discussion. The Texas Trio is back, and the issue is Rick Perry's team up with the Sports Betting Alliance. Stephen, is this an odd couple moment that's doomed to fail, or do you think it can pay out?
I don't think it's doomed to fail, especially if there is proper education. And Rick Perry says he's being paid well to educate the public, because this is for lawmakers to give residents, citizens of Texas, the opportunity to decide if they want this constitutional amendment. So I think if the proper education is there, it will actually pass. Now, he has to do some lobbying and has to get some help. And I think this is going to be heavy spotlight on the Texas Senate, not the House.
Greg, the promised payout for the state is more than $200 million a year. Do you think Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick will let it ride in the Senate, or does it go bust there? And can you do this without a pun?
Rudy, when it comes to the key player on all the gambling proposals, you are dead solid perfect in pointing to Dan Patrick. My sources believe both sports betting and casino gambling can get 100 votes in the House, especially with the kind of big money push we're likely to see from Perry's group and folks like the Sands PAC on casino gambling. The bottleneck would come in the Senate, and only if the lieutenant governor makes the call. He literally has that much stroke. Now, as far as the revenue argument, $200 million is child's play in a session where lawmakers have a $30 billion surplus to divvy up. So that's not as compelling as it would be in leaner times. I think the ultimate fallback position for the big three on all this gambling stuff is just letting Texans have the final say in a statewide referendum.
Stephen, the Alliance has some pretty big sports names behind it, like Jerry Jones, Mark Cuban up there in the Dallas area. Just to name a few, are those players game changers in all this, in your opinion?
I think it can help, and let's look at it. I mean, this is talking about money. And so, of course, Jerry Jones and Mark Cuban are going to say, hey, transformational, this is changing of the times. People are more willing to do it. Like Rick Perry said, it's already being done. And keep in mind, down the stretch of the campaign for governor, Jerry Jones cut Governor Abbott a $500,000 check. So if Jerry Jones really wants it, I think he has some pull to try to make it happen.
Greg, Houston State Senator Carol Alvarado has pre-filed a resolution to let voters decide on sports betting and creating a gaming commission. But that resolution also opens the door for casinos, which Republicans in the Senate, which Republican, I should say, in the Senate is likely to sign on to that legislation. Do you think any of them will?
Well, Rudy, I rarely say this, but this time your guess is actually as good as mine. All kidding aside, I will offer this opposition to the expansion of the gambling in Texas remains a plank in the Republican Party's official state platform. It's been my experience that Republicans in Austin rarely cast a vote without considering just how it's going to play with grassroots voters in the next GOP primary, and whether a challenger can weaponize a perceived pro-gambling position on the campaign trail. Never forget, guys, roughly 2 million Republican primary voters are basically setting policy for the other 28 million folks in this state, and they've been doing it for a long time.
So who in the Senate?
Man, it's anybody's guess. You got me. You're there more than I am.
And Stephen, do you have any idea? Who do you think?
Man, I really don't know. And that's why I go back to saying the education of it. I think if the education message is well, and look, we're not going to have casinos, at least in my opinion. I don't think that's going to happen. But the sports betting online is already going on in a way. Texas just hasn't tapped into trying to get revenue off of it. That's why I think it could get some momentum, but they have to really separate themselves from the conversation of bringing in-person casinos in Texas versus something that you can just do on your phone.
Remember, guys, you got to get 2/3 in both houses to get it to a constitutional amendment vote. That's a tough road to hoe.
All right, guys. To see this interview or any of our other past interviews, go to our station's YouTube page.
And continue the conversation with us on social media.
The Fox Texas Trio is off for the holiday, but we will be back in 2023. And when we come back, we're diving right into the new legislative session. Remember to let us know what you think the issue is, and have a happy new year.